to it.
So let's see if they seem to make sense. The first, let's concentrate on the very first verse. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Translated somebody? God spoke to Moshe. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe. Anything else? Lemor. What's with that?
Tell to the children.
Wait, what's lemor? Just translate the first verse. Huh? To say. It's an infinitive, to say. What do you mean to say? God spoke to Moshe to say. If I would say Yaakov spoke to Ruth to say, what do I mean to say? What does it mean?
To say to somebody else.
To say to someone else. To whom? Right. Who else is going to say it to? So there's things apparently which God says to say, and things which God doesn't say to say. Let's look now at the second verse. Speak to the children of Israel, and they should take a raised offering. What's wrong with that? Speak to the children of Israel. He already said to say. God said this is for quote, this is for public release, this announcement. So why does it have to say then, speak to the children of Israel? Or conversely, it could just be God spoke to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel. Why put the lemor in to say if you're going to tell him, speak to the children of Israel? That's the simple problem. So the Or HaChaim, usually you have Vayedaber Hashem Moshe lemor, Ish ki yikna, whatever it is, and then comes immediately the statement, not speak to the children of Israel. So the Or HaChaim deals with that problem. And he quotes a Gemara, that lemor is to teach you that you have no right to tell someone else what a third party told you unless they specifically authorize it. So lemor means this statement is for public release. Okay?
In fact, we get it often, don't we, in the Chumash?
Yes, very often. Lemor means it's a statement which God told Moshe he could release. But he doesn't have to. According to the Or HaChaim, it's very interesting. God says this is one that you can put in your public files, and you can release it when you decide is the right moment. This would fit very nicely the view of Rebbe Yishmael as opposed to that of Rebbe Akiva in the Gemara, that the Torah was spoken in human language and given bit by bit. Each time when there was a decision they could learn some more, they had absorbed what was before, they got some more. So a lemor doesn't necessarily mean perhaps tell it immediately. It means it's for public release. So when God says Daber el bnei Yisrael, He's not leaving it optional that it's merely for public release, but you have to tell it to them, okay? So the key word lemor is affixed to all statements which may be told over, and if God insisted to be told over, perhaps soon, then he adds Daber el bnei Yisrael. That's the Or HaChaim. But he learns also for human beings, when someone tells you something, you should not tell it over to anyone else without permission. All right? Interesting, very interesting.
That is also an instruction, isn't it?
Huh?
Compared to Yomer, he could say Vayomer.
Yes, Daber is always an instruction. I translated on my sheet, in order to highlight this, God spoke to Moshe to say over, direct the children of Israel. It's heavy language, commanding language, Daber. Amirah is softer language, gentler. For example, we have Amirah by Beis Yaakov, the women of Israel, that Moshe is told to really tell it to the man, but gently tell it to the women. We have that a number of times, the contrast between Amor and Daber. We have two descriptions here. Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. That itself is a little funny, because you could just say, speak to the people, the Am, or something like that. We know who they are 1,000 times over, right? It's bnei Yisrael. Again, this is assuming that the Torah has every word and letter count. As I pointed out several weeks ago, that's not necessarily a fair assumption. We're used to doing that in the yeshivas. And Tzvi Ari Yehuda, in his work on the two Mechiltas, which we dealt with last week, pointed out that that's a common error. It's an automatic assumption of the school of Rebbe Akiva, which says that the Torah is like a secret code with every little symbol having meaning. But according to the school of Rabbi Yishmael, that the Torah speaks in the language of people with normal human style. So you can say that God just speak to the children of Israel because that's the way you speak. And you may not necessarily derive something from it. But someone does derive something from it.
But it might be both.
Might be both. Daber al b'nei Israel. Speak, as I say, you might derive something from it, but you mustn't necessarily. Speak to the children of Israel, v'yikhu li, and they should take for me truma, a raised up offering.
Why do you say from me?
For me. Li, for me. To me or for me. V'yikhu li, they should take for me a raised offering. Is there something odd about that phrase? Is that how one speaks? Speak to Martha, and she should take me a cake. I wouldn't say take me, what would I say?
Bring me.
Bring me or give me. Alright? Give me a raised offering. Give me a nadava. Yeah, we gotta print the parsha sheets. Give a nadava. I wouldn't say take a nadava. I would say give. So why does it say they should take for me, for God, a raised offering, a truma? Then we already said, who is taking the raised offering? Who is it? B'nai Yisrael. Daber b'nai Yisrael. V'yikhu li truma. Me'et kol ish asher yivenu libo. From every man whose heart motivates him, just say, Me'et asher yivenu libo. Why put in the words kol ish, every man? Kol ish asher yivenu libo. Tikhu, you should take, that makes sense, Moshe receives it, you should take my raised offering. Alright, we're in the second verse already, we're doing fine. Now, what's this kol ish? So, Alufe Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda David Freund, had a very interesting conception. According to the rabbis, all the materials that were given to build the tabernacle, the gold, the silver, the wood, the cloth, all this stuff, fell into two categories. One category was material which had been prepared in anticipation. According to some Midrashim, Yaakov knew they would eventually go out and build a Mishkan in the desert. And Yaakov already supplied them, planted trees. He planted trees so that they would have the wood and so forth. We'll get to that later, the acacia wood. So there is a category of materials which were already prepared. Then, people who didn't have already prepared materials, they gave whatever was suitable that they happened to have with them. It says, each one, Asher Yimtzaita, what was with him. Now, is there a difference between those two categories? The materials that have been pre-prepared by Yaakov and company, and the materials which they were giving on the spot? Which would require closer inspection?
The presents.
The presents. Why? Because we assume that whatever Yaakov put away, he did right, in full line with all the specifications of the building department of God. Building department specifications are always very complicated. There's stress factors in steel. We're in the house of an architect. He can't just dream up something and it feels right. You have to check every tiny component for its durability and strength and flexibility and so forth. So we assume Yaakov checked out all the building department specs upstairs before he put aside materials to build the Mishkan. But the Jews in the desert, the newly liberated slaves, while they may have meant very well, Asher Yidvenu Libo, everyone whose heart moved them, they had the wonderful feelings. But they may not have checked so carefully all the specifications, they may not have known how to check them. So Moshe has to check their materials to make sure they meet the standard for the divine building code. Okay? That's how he interprets it. So for B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, the ancestral Jewish people, you just take it. But they'll give it. It'll be a taking to them, but they'll give it. Then from everyone whose heart motivates them, you take my truma. It's repeated, and the word truma is repeated. You take and check that it's fit to be a raised offering to God. Very nice word. Now this rabbi, Tzvi Yehuda Freund, was involved with Hasidic sects. Can anybody guess which? He was a Jerusalem rabbi who died not so long ago. He was involved with Tolos Aaron, the most extreme anti-Zionist synagogue in Mei Shearim, and was Satmar. I think he was a Dayan in Satmar. But his writing shows quite a breadth of personality amidst great traditional knowledge and viewpoint. So he says like this. He says with all of us, it's just like Reb Soloveitchik, there's two parts to our religion. What we raise up to God, how we change and manipulate the world to bring out the divine in it, and it's such a kedusha. How we do that comes from two sources. How do you approach God and transform the world to God? Where do you get all this stuff from? God make an appearance to you, Martha? No, never. Anyone here have a vision from God? Just out of curiosity?
Yeah.
Yeah, you, I'm sure. What did God say to you? Edmund, shape up.
No, I just get insights from looking at the letters.
All right, insights, but a direct communication. So how do you know what to do to bring the world to God, to bring yourself to God? How do you know it? How do you know what to do? Maybe standing on your head will help. Maybe doing Easter meditation. How do you know what works? How to get close to God? Is it being nice to your neighbor? Is it being ultra makpid only to eat badats so you can support their holy wars? Well, what is it that brings you close to God and transforms the world? How do you know? What are your sources? Your ancestors. So the first source, and psychologists have said that true religion, where it's not just an ego trip, should be rooted in some tradition. Our first sources, we have a tradition from our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We start off our prayers mentioning Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? That's how you're talking to God, how you know the whole process works, that it has any meaning or purpose. Of course, they did it. And we have a Torah handed down, Moshe to Yeshua, Yeshua to Zakanim, and it traces it down to Yanshe Knesset Sagadola, and Pirkei Avot goes through all the rabbis, then the Rambam takes up from there in his introduction to the Mishnah and brings it down to his time, and later books show us how it came from the Rambam down to 1988. So we have a tradition, right? Tradition. What's the other source of our knowledge of what's right and wrong and how to relate to God and how to deal with the world? What's our other source besides tradition?
Torah.
That's tradition. Torah's part of tradition. What's our other source besides tradition to know what we should do, what's right and wrong? Is there another source?
Oh, the sages today.
That's also part of tradition. All right, today's sages, they're interpreting the tradition. Is there something else?
Education.
Let's think of the bracha on the Torah. Asher nasan lanu Torah semes, who has given us a Torah of truth. V'chaye olam, an eternal life, nata b'sochenu, has planted in us. He has planted in us. And you could say it means the Torah plants eternal life in us, but what's another way to interpret it? Instinct. Our insides. We are a living Sefer Torah in a sense. So everybody, I don't care who it is, works with two components. He works with the tradition, which is not from him, it's what he got from all the generations before. And he works with his own quest and search for God. As Reb Soloveitchik says, the Torah says, if you seek God, no matter how far you are away, you will find him. But if you don't seek him, even though you grew up in Mei Shearim, you daven 3 times a day, but if you don't ask your own questions and aren't sensitive to your own feelings, you won't really find God. You'll just be a robot repeating the tradition. So therefore, a man must have the tradition, otherwise it's just a searching, groping in the dark. And if he ever gets anywhere, he'll probably be too old to do anything about it and will have ruined his life already. That's what Saadia Gaon says. If man can understand the whole Torah from his own mind and feelings, which he felt you could. So why have a Torah? He says, because until you get there, you have all kinds of bad habits which would cloud your thinking, your life would have been wasted. So it's not sad. We'll do what God said for Nishma, and then we'll try to integrate our own understanding with it. So therefore, a man, and this is what this Satmar Dayan said too, he said a man must make his own search for God. And he will come up with all kinds of ideas and feelings and contributions. However, those, he says, we treat with more suspicion. What he got from his fathers, those materials prepared for the Mishkan from the children of Israel, just let them give them. But that which each man volunteers from his own heart, his own innovations, you take the motion, examine them carefully to see if all the newfangled stuff is fit for inclusion in our tradition. These new additions. That's a Satmar version of Reb Soloveitchik's words, which is actually a pretty good thing. Okay, so now we've done pretty much 2 Pesukim. we still have the question as to why the Torah says, "V'yikhuli," they shall take for me rather than they shall give for me a raised offering. Any suggestions?
Yes, I have
Yeah.
an idea. It's like going out of yourself. It goes somewhere, goes to.
Take, let's take. It's not telling you go, it says take.
Take it to the Mishkan.
Well, you
To
give
the
it
altar.
for God. Do you take it for God? Where do you take it from?
From yourself.
From yourself. All right, so.
The whole idea is to give up your ego.
So you're saying, that's a nice thought, that it's a taking away from where it is. That the stress is you should disengage yourself from it, and your possessions all should be in the service of God. You should take them away from their usual self-serving function, and you will now take them and put them in another place for God. That's very nice. And similarly would be the word Truma. What does Truma mean? What does Truma mean? Huh?
It is a present.
Portion?
A Truma is a donation.
Donation.
In modern
Today, in modern Hebrew, the word means donation. It comes from here.
It's not
Donation to the
actually
temple.
strictly a sacrifice, is it?
No. So how would you translate Truma? What's the shoresh? What's the root of the word? Lift up. Ram al kol goyim Hashem, al hashemayim kavodo. God is great, mighty, high, lifted up above all nations. And in their eyes, he's up in heaven. But in our eyes, Hamashpil l'rot b'shamayim ba'aretz, that God comes down into earth. And you can find God in everyday life. All right, so Ram is high or elevated. Laharim is to raise something. So therefore, Truma is raising something. And that's the idea that Admon expressed. That you take it out of its normal, rather sensual, temporary, low context. Gold and silver and brass are jewelry and wealth, things which aren't very high or elevated or spiritual, and you lift them up by using them in God's sanctuary to build a great synagogue with lots of glass and gold and real pretty things. So you lift up those material elements and sort of incorporate them in the world of spirit, in the world of permanence, in the world of eternity. That's Truma. And you shall take them and make them a Truma. Very nice. There's one other drush on that at least. Sometimes a person thinks he's getting something and he's really losing something. And sometimes a person feels he's giving something and he's really getting something. Okay? We learned at the end of the beginning of Exodus, Vayechazu Sham, that the Jews got possessions there. The Jews got prosperous and multiplied in Egypt. Vayechazu Ba, and they were what? How would you translate Vayechazu Ba? They grabbed.
Grip.
Yes, they took things there. They grabbed them. Le'achos b'mashu is to hold on to it. They held on to their stuff there. But actually, if you analyze the word carefully, vayachazu, what binyan? What you just graduated the first part of Wolpan? What tense? Not what tense. What type of verb is it? Which category? Passive. Right. Nifal. Yikatev. It shall be written. Yikatev yichasem or tikotev tichasem. You should be written and sealed for a good year. Passive. So vayechazu ba is they were grabbed in it. When a man thinks he's acquiring possessions in Galut, he is being acquired by those possessions. Because of the ranch house, because of the nice car, because of the cheap video, because of everything working good and cheap and efficient, he suddenly is a slave to a culture which is not his destiny, which is not his own, which pulls him out of his true world. So therefore, he thinks he's acquiring, but he's being acquired. Sometimes it's the other way around. You decide, okay, I'll give $100 for sponsoring a Parsha sheet or whatever. But you think you're giving, but maybe you're getting, assuming God likes it. I don't know whose side he's on. So you don't know when you give. Certainly when you give for the Mishkan, you give a Truma. At that point, you feel you're giving up your money, but you're really getting, because that's what you take with you. You can't take it with you, but this you can take with you. We say, Aser ti aser, you shall surely tithe. The rabbis say, read it, Aser ti asher. tithe that you should become wealthy. Maybe not materially, maybe in different ways. But there's sometimes when you give that you're really getting, and sometimes when you think you're getting that you're really giving up something or being possessed, okay? So that's they shall take for me a truma. It's not they shall give because they're really taking things for themselves. They don't know it. Okay. We did two Pesukim already. Yeah.
That's another idea, that everything we have is from God. So we have to take it from God in order to give it to Him.
That's certainly also. You can't really give God because everything is His. We ourselves, if it's made by our labors, where do our abilities and strength come from, and the raw materials we use? It's all from God. It's from Him, from you that we're giving to you. That idea is very frequently expressed. Okay, so we did the first two Pesukim very nicely. Now, Bezosa Truma, again the word Truma. This is the raised offering, Asher Tikhu Meitam, which you should take from them. Why do you need that other phrase? We just said what you should take from them, and gave all the drushes. So why now? And this is the Truma which you should take from them. Gold and silver and bronze and so forth. So the Saporno says, this and nothing else. Someone has a beautiful sheet of plexiglass. Someone has a really nice piece of silk or polyester. We're now about the 50th anniversary of the discovery of nylon. Great event in modern life. Plastics, for good or for bad, who knows? You only know afterwards. The swamp was a mistake apparently when they drained it, ecologically. You never know what's good or bad, only God knows. That theme comes in here. At the end of creation, God blesses His entire universe. He sees it's good and blesses it. Moshe sees at the end of the Mishkan that they did as God said and He blessed them. Moshe doesn't know what's good or bad, but if they did what God said, it's good. Man can't know. Man can only know how it feels at the moment. All right, so the Saporno says, this is the raised offering you should take from them, that the Mishkan had very, very strict specifications, as I mentioned before. And you could just bring any material. It might be very beautiful material. It might be very nice. Some rare animal, skin, but no. There are very specific materials to give the desired effect here. So we start off with gold and silver and brass. Now, there are statements in the Midrash Rabbah especially, which I'll have on the sheet, which compare everything in the Mishkan to the creation story. And Torah is light, and starts out with light, and so forth. There's many, many comparisons. That what the Mishkan really is a reconstruction in miniature, a symbolic reconstruction of the basic nature of the universe, and the basic nature of man, and the basic nature of the Torah. And where is all this happening, by the way? Where does God speak to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel? Where does all this happen? Well, Sinai. Remember what we had at the end of last week's Sedra? They get a whole bunch of laws. We're taking it now as the Ramban, that everything is in chronological order. And Moshe goes up. This is what he's told. What did he do up there 40 days and 40 nights? He learned about the Mishkan. And we'll see shortly, God says, as I will show you, or as I have shown you up on the mountain.
As I showed you.
We'll see. We'll see.
That's why it's confusing. That's why
it gets very confusing, and there's many versions. Some say this whole thing only happened after the golden calf, but I, for simplicity's sake, I am just doing according to the Ramban, who says everything is in chronological order. We'll see if it works out. Okay. Then you will take Techelet, Bargaman, V'tolad Shani. You'll take blue wool and dyed blue and dyed purple and dyed red. V'sheish, fine linen. V'izim. What's izim?
Goats. It's goats.
What is it? Goat's hair or goats?
It's goats. We had it last year. We had this
right.
Last year.
Izim is goats. Now, do you embody live goats into the walls of the Mishkan or something? Whole goats, like the Egyptians did with the Jewish babies in their buildings?
We know that he's talking about cloths.
Yes, but is it goat's hair or goats? The next words are, and the skins of rams dyed red, and the skins of techashim, whatever they are. So we say the skins of the animal. Here we don't say the hair or the skin of the goats. We say goats. Later we have all the wise women spun the goats. Not the goat's hair, the goats. And the rabbis deduce from that the true wisdom of a woman is in spinning. Whatever that means. Has anyone here spun? Nobody ever spun? You don't know what you're missing.
We haven't got an intro women.
We've knitted.
You've knitted? That's not what it's mentioning. Spinning. To take the raw fabric and make it into something useful. Thread. Anyway, so goats apparently is literal, and as Rashi brings from our tradition, that they spun the goat's hair into thread on the goats. On the goats. That's why I asked if anyone did spinning, especially of goat's hair. Apparently, while it's alive on the goat's body, it could be when the goat is killed, I don't know, but I assume not. It could be that somehow retains a certain moisture or flexibility or something that makes much better thread. So according to our tradition, just reading the words literally in the Bible, it certainly makes sense. Otherwise, the reading is very peculiar. We have the Se'er of the goats by Yaakov and so forth. So here they took goats and they spun the hair on the goats. And I guess after it was spun into thread, then they clipped it off. Then they sheared the goat. Now, by the way, I forgot one thing. The thing I mentioned before from the Orach Hayim, that you need permission to hand over God's word. Lamor is something you can put into public use, into the files. Answers another question back in Genesis. What question? There's a very difficult question in Genesis, which Gedalia Fleer gave this answer, but we couldn't find the source till I found it now. The problem was, how did Abraham know that Sarah was going to have a baby a year later? Anybody? Angels, right? Wrong. I knew you'd all say that. All right. No, that's how Sarah knew.
Yeah,
that's the beginning of Vayelech. But at the end of Lech Lecha, the previous portion, with God's revelation to Avram and changing the name from Avram to Avram and Sarai to Sarah, he tells him you're going to have a kid a year from now with Sarah and you'll name your son. The whole story. And Avram apparently does not tell Sarah. And she doesn't know about it until the angels come. So the question I asked, why not tell him? So there were all sorts of answers, and Gedalia Fleer said he thought that you're just not supposed to tell it unless God tells you to tell. So here's the proof of it. The Orach Chaim brought that Gemara, that Lamor, it's not Vayomer Hashem al Avram Lamor, just Vayomer Hashem al Avram. So he understood that this was not to be communicated at this point to Sarah. Okay. Now, we have the materials pretty much here. See, where are we up to? Acacia wood, shemen lamaor, olive oil for the light, besamim l'shemen hamishcha, spices for the anointing oil, v'liktoret hasamim, and for the incense, avnei shoham, usually translated onyx stones, v'avnei miluim, and the various stones with 12 stones in front, which were put on the ephod and the choshen, the two garments of the Kohen, which we'll get to next week. There's a problem with that too. There's no Kohanim at this point. Where are these garments all about? Unless God is giving Moshe information in advance. Or maybe the temporary Kohanim, the firstborn, had similar garments. I don't know.
Why? The Torah says that we're going to be a nation of priests.
Yes, that's all of us. But when it speaks of an ephod and choshen, it's speaking about one Kohen probably. You're suggesting we all would have such garments at this point. Interesting.
At the end of days, sure.
Maybe. I don't know if we put ephod and choshen in the singular then. V'yasu li, and they should make for me mikdash, a sanctuary, and then God will dwell where?
Among them.
Among them, not in the sanctuary. V'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell in the midst of them. I heard from a fellow named Ruben Schwartz, who heard from a Russian Hasidic rabbi, I think, Bershavsky, something like that. An interesting thing. V'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell in the midst of them. This is temporarily now going to be in the Mishkan, but after that there will be two temples. How long will the temples last? Anyone know how long the temples lasted? A little more. 410 years the first temple, and they say 420 years the second temple. All right?
Well, wasn't it about, didn't they build it just after they got back from Babel?
Yeah, 70 years in between.
And then finished up until 70 ACE.
Yeah, 70.
About 600.
1 second, they come back. 586 is the destruction of the first temple. 560, but it takes quite a while to build it. Ezra comes back, but it's not built right away. Right? So it comes out, I believe they say 420 years. So assuming
It was
he's
in
correct.
use for 420
Yeah,
years.
yeah. Now, assuming that that's correct, it's very nice. Vishachanti, I shall dwell. If, it can be read very simply, Vishachan, and he shall dwell, Tet, Taf, Yud. How much is Taf Yud? 410. Okay? So the simple reading is he shall dwell 410 years. God will be there 410 years. Visheni, and the second temple. Well, let's take Visheni out of it. If you take Visheni out, let's see how this works. Yeah, you have left Taf Chaf. And the second, Taf Chaf. How much is Taf Chaf? 420. Okay? Now, what's in the middle in between them? Chaf Nun, 70. All right, so that's Vishachanti. I shall dwell b'tocham, in their midst. So we don't build the Mishkan to have a dwelling place for God, because God, the heaven and heavens of heavens, as Solomon said on dedication, can't contain him. He doesn't need our place. The earth is but his footstool. But we concentrate him there in that one place so that we can pick him up, that we can consciousness raise ourselves, so that he dwells within us. Then once God dwells within us, what do? We walk right out with him. We stick him in our pocket like a pickpocket. God is integrated within us, and the pickpocket walks away and takes his loot back home. So everyone acquires God, so to speak, integrates God into his personality when he comes to the Mishkan or Mikdash, and then he takes God inside of himself back home to revolutionize, to change, to spiritualize life back home on the farm in Galilee or wherever he comes from. Okay, that's clearly the idea here. In Shabbat Shiurim, Rev Miller says that this idea of focusing is only necessary when you fall. When man is at his true heights, he can see God in the Carvel store, in the bathroom, in anything, in the most material, the most gross things. He can see God in everything. But when man has lost his awareness and consciousness of God, and at best just speaks of Mother Nature or some other euphemism of an impersonal God, so at that point he needs all kinds of focuses, mitzvahs, very perceivable, sense-perceivable objects, which will give him a feeling of God, excuse me, by their excellent design for that purpose. So the Mishkan serves as a focal point for a Jewish people which has fallen away from being able to see God everywhere. And some even say it's a concession to the sin of the golden calf, to their low state at this point. Similarly, various Sfarim recommend that a person find one mitzvah which turns him on. There's all kinds of mitzvahs. Some you feel good about, some you don't feel so good about. What's your favorite mitzvah?
I'm having a lot of difficulty with all of them.
With all of them. Is there any one that comes easy?
Birkat HaMazon, I like.
You like Birkat HaMazon, fine. What's yours? Is there one mitzvah do you find like pleasant to do? No problem.
He enjoys eating.
Yeah, all right, you need the two together. Any particular mitzvah you can think of that comes easily to you? No, you?
Kiddush Shabbat.
Kiddush b'Shabbat, yeah. Danny? Any special mitzvah that you find like really you can do with joy and enthusiasm?
I haven't thought about it.
All right. What would you say?
Well, I was going to say Shabbat.
Shabbat. All right. You dig Shabbat. Hang in there. Shabbat's coming. Ruth?
And Bikkur Cholim.
Bikur Cholim. All right. Visiting the sick. Milton, what would you say? Volunteering. Martha?
Yeah, I would say also volunteering and also helping people.
Good.
Need help.
I find personally learning, but not detailed technical learning, brand learning like this, going, we're technical, but sort of overview learning turns me on, and building a sukkah. And the whole sukkah thing turns me on. The lulav and esrog and all, not so much. It's nice, but the sukkah turns me on somehow. I like to build, I eat from all old houses, fixed up our place in the old city. Each person has something which they don't have to fight so hard. So in his exposition, Rabbi Miller says that just like the Mishkan was able to focus everyone, to get them all enthused, so the same way everybody has to find his equivalent of the Mishkan, a particular mitzvah which turns him on. And then he should do that one with really learn about and do it with zeal. And from the zeal and involvement with mitzvah, which he will get naturally through that mitzvah, he will gradually spread it to other mitzvahs and so forth. That's his concept anyway. And he thereby tries to explain when the Talmud says, anyone who keeps this mitzvah is as though he kept the whole Torah. What do you mean he didn't keep the whole Torah? He kept the one mitzvah. But somehow through that one mitzvah you can get such basic insights and principles that it will lend itself to make it much easier for you to keep the entire Torah. Which reminds me, one thing I did forget, the word take. That's a strong word. Like if someone wanted to speak in a very genteel fashion, they might not say, I took it, I purchased this, I received it. Take, you almost get the feeling of somebody reaching in to grab. In fact, when someone really does a job on someone else and sells them something which he really shouldn't buy, he says, I got taken, at least in English parlance. He took me. So the word take, lekach, has a strong connotation. And Rabbeinu Bachye says that indeed the word take denotes doing something with zeal and enthusiasm. Okay? Ki lekach tov nasati lechem, Torah yafazovu. I've given you something to really take. Don't give up my Torah, and so forth.
I've got another idea.
Yes.
When we talk of Jerusalem,
Yeah.
even now, we say going up to Jerusalem.
That's
So
the
maybe-
raising notion.
Yeah, it's the Beit Mishkan. You go up to the Beit Mishkan, and we're talking about a raised offering. So take it up.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking it up.
Well, his concept is it should be done with enthusiasm. It should be taken.
Right.
Now, that leads to an interesting discussion in itself. Enthusiasm. Like, there are people who are always enthusiastic. Where are the most enthusiastic people to be found? The most. Sane asylums, probably. All right, now, then there are people who are never enthusiastic, who are always just take everything very quietly and calmly with no enthusiasm. Where are the most unemotional people to be found? Insane asylums, probably also. Catatonics and so forth. Now, so somehow enthusiasm is a very complicated thing. What is healthy enthusiasm? What is not? There's the learner and there's the enthusiast. There's the quiet or sameach boy and there's the enthusiastic eshaterer boy. Each place has a different milieu, a different color to its emotional nature. Now, Rabbeinu Bachye's theory is one should be enthused. And he quotes a pasuk from Mishli, take my Torah rather than gold, and so forth, my teaching rather than silver, implying that there should be that same zeal that exists for gold and silver. It's not hard to work up enthusiasm over those things. I mean, you see the guys in Machne Yehuda, they're all hustling to make a buck, kablanim, salesmen. Everybody doesn't just work quietly to make a buck. They really get enthused about it and push it. Right? So that enthusiasm is very good. So the idea of the Mishkan, as he explains it in his introduction to this parsha, is that enthusiasm for the material world, when the Jews, you should be enthusiastic about God in the world. Who's going to be enthusiastic about making some money or putting up a building? There's a God in the world that you can relate to. That should turn you on. Buying fruit, it's the bracha maybe which should turn you on. Or that God gave you the fruit. All right, but this is where you're at. If you're just going to work on all that God and learning stuff, you're going to be a dull boy, sort of. It's not going to work. You know you're not there yet. So he says what you do is you take your natural enthusiasms for gold and silver, for material, tangible things and building, and you use them in such a way that they will pull you out of that itself. You take gold and silver and brass and nice wood and cloth and dyes, and you build a mishkan, you build a tabernacle. Once you've built that tabernacle, you come around to use it. I mean, it's not nice you should donate to shul and never show up for services. So once you show up for services, you begin to get the message. It's an association with all this enthusiastic building of physical, tangible nature. Then you begin to transfer some of the enthusiasm to the spiritual process itself. And the ultimate goal is that God, you don't care about God dwelling in that house, but that God should dwell in them, betoch leiv kol echad v'echad, in the heart of each and every one. So the Mishkan is viewed as a transitional process to wean one away from the material world without destroying his personality or enthusiasm, and to gradually transfer that enthusiasm from the material world to the spiritual world. Yes, Dan?
I heard that the word enthusiasm and theos, in God.
Very nice. Enthusiasm, entheism. All right, very nice.
In theos, in God.
Now, this thing of enthusiasm coming from the physical and tangible, I once thought about in my attempting to develop a system of therapy for therapists. There's a problem, in my opinion, with philosophers, psychologists of a high order, maybe some writers even, people who deal with words and abstract thought. What is the problem? The problem is they're never really sure they accomplished anything. You talk, you think it does something. A man who fixes a car has a very tangible accomplishment. The car didn't work, now it works. A woman who cleans the house looked rotten, now the house looks beautiful. You paint the room, it's no longer yellowing or dirty or old, it's bright and cheerful. It's a very tangible thing, it's good for the soul. Patient comes to a psychologist is well trained in things, and I'm the last to knock it, they really, they know a lot. But still, it's so complicated and deep. You're dealing with an image of God, a human being, not just with something in the physical world. You're never sure if you're right or if there are factors you don't know, or it's just so complicated. Person going into philosophy and trying to establish principles of truth, if he has any honesty, he's never sure he's right. So, but man needs a feeling of security and accomplishment. At least he should be able to fake himself out that he has it. So therefore, I would say that people who are in very abstract things like that should have some tangible things that they do, cooking or painting or fixing cars or taking pictures, whatever, so that they can get a feeling of groundedness and security and accomplishment. Now, in the course of normal life, there is something to ground the very Luftmensch, high-flying person. What grounds him? This guy just sits and learns Torah, and his mind is somewhere in the Kabbalah, and he's not in this earth. What grounds this person?
It's just day-to-day living. So
Can he avoid day-to-day living? Maybe he can. Just take some bread.
Children.
Right. The thing that forces you not to get too spaced out, if you have any sort of conscience, is children. So therefore, in a sense, if you have a system which both stresses abstract preoccupation and the highest metaphysical speculation, but also stresses that everybody has to have children. So even though the ideal in such a society is you marry a good, strong woman who can run the whole show and you can sit and learn, you marry an Eshet Chayil, not one of these weak, helpless, modern PhD ladies. Still, you can't help it. Your children come to you. There's sometimes she's sick. Even the best of the Eshet Chayils get sick once in a while. And you have to deal with the things. Reb Soloveitchik tells a story of, I think, a grand uncle of his who was really a person who was learning day and night and paid no attention to his children or family. His own father, who was a Talmid Chacham, had to help the wife to deal with the children. This man just wanted nothing to do with the real world. He produced the children, and that was about it. So finally, a daughter got married. A daughter gets married, he has to come to the wedding and all. He wasn't a bad person. So he's getting dressed, and as he puts on his frock coat, a button pops off. Oi! Tsar Gidol Bani, the difficulties of raising children. So you can't help it. Something's going to happen. They have to eat, you have to support them. And there is a verse in Song of Songs 5:11, if I remember, about Shchorot Korev, something like that, black as ravens. And the black ravens have a reputation for being thieves and nasty and merciless in the Talmud as opposed to the white ravens. And the Talmud comments, I think it's Eruvin 22a, I looked at it a little while ago, that refers to the great scholars who learn day and night to produce. And they have to make themselves black as ravens, emaciated, hardly eating. And they have to make themselves cruel as ravens, vis-a-vis their families. Now, this gets into a most interesting ethical question, which I suddenly, when I didn't have to, I spent 2 days on it now, I added to what Ruth typed already, the Parsha sheet, so I don't know how much you'll get in. I added a whole thing on how should the true Torah person relate to his children. And it's not a simple issue. I'm showing you a big need for the children. They're like the material link which keeps your enthusiasm and life involvement and groundedness going, so you don't wind up in some abstract place. But on the other hand, as I expressed it, they are in opposition to your main task. The man is to learn Torah and really know about God and all.
But men have to teach their sons.
Teach, yes. Teach, yes. 2 years old.
No,
1 year
2
old.
years, no.
So what does he do with them when they're 1 and 2 years old? My wife's comment would be if he doesn't do anything with them at 1 and 2, they won't want to learn from him at 5. Well, in the good old days, you just took out the strap and they learned. And then and once they began learning, they appreciated it and they stayed learning. On the contrary, that's how you got Daddy's love and attention in the Misnagdik Yeshivish world. If you were a scholar, a little Rambam.
No, I tell you, when they're very young, he has to tell them off, that's all.
That's all. As you said, it doesn't have anything to do with it. Maybe. I mean, we're an open-minded society here. We don't go by social conventions.
And I heard that in those days, when a child started to learn Torah, you bake a honey cake with a Hebrew letter.
Who's you? Not me.
People used to
The
bake.
women.
The woman used to bake a honey cake with a Hebrew letter, showing that the Torah is sweet.
Yeah, the women did all kinds of nice things for their children. But I'm talking about the men now. There's no question a woman should be nice to her children, be close to them, and play with them, and do everything. But how about the men? Now, first of all, how many hours a day should a man spend on Torah? What would you say?
Well, it also meant that there's 24 hours a day.
Well, that's obviously wrong. I mean, you have to go to the
And
bathroom.
you
and eat and
apologize
sleep.
every time you stop.
You apologize when you stop. I mean, you try to spend every minute you can. Is that the Jewish ideal? Yes, I would say so. You should be occupied in it. Women don't have this obligation, morning and night. They have their burden, man has his. So day and night, of course, day and night can be the minimum statutory requirement, an hour in the daytime, an hour in the nighttime, or a certain fixed period. But the basic ideal seems to be you should make your own living, but as much as possible you should learn. So that doesn't mean a man should study an hour a day or 2 hours a day. 5 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 15 hours a day if you can, before he's married. No, what does he need money for? I mean, just earn a little to eat, and that's it, or eat at home, his family. So the ideal is man should learn all the time. And how much time should he spend with his little children? Like, for example, you have a sweet little child, 1 year old, 2 years old. You can play with him 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. Should you do it? Is that morally wrong? Obviously, it's a very nice thing to do. It's a fine mitzvah of Gemilas Chesed if you're not a male who has to learn. If a person can't learn, he doesn't have the intellectual ability, or I don't know, some reason or other he can't learn, there's nothing around to learn with, nobody around to learn with, all right. So then he should do things like this. It's not that there's anything wrong with a man playing with little children. On the contrary, it's an act of kindness, of human beauty, of divinity. You see the soul of a little child, and it's pure and all. But assuming he can learn, so should he do it? Or is he doing something wrong if he doesn't? I'll just give you a few sources, and then we'll go back to our subject matter. But I thought this was so interesting that I spent a couple days going through the sources. A prime source would be in Pirkei Avot, chapter 3, depending on your edition, Mishnah 10, 13, or 14. There's no consistent numbering of the sections within the chapters of Pirkei Avot. Reb Dosa ben Hyrcanus says, 3 things take a man out of his world, of the world which God wants him to be in. Terrible things. I mean, what is it, like murder, adultery? I don't know. That comes later. There's things like that mentioned by Rabbi Kiva. But what are the 3 terrible things which wreck a person's whole mission in life? Anyone remember? Anyone remember? What are the 3 things which wreck a man's world?
Is that sleeping late?
Shena shel shachri, sleep in the morning, to sleep late. What else? This is for males, not for women. Yayin shel tzaharayim, having a nice leisurely lunch with a couple glasses of wine. Is it nice to sleep late? You might argue it is. It's pleasant. Is it nice to have a leisurely lunch with wine? Nothing so terrible. And what's next?
Spending the time with argument.
That's the 4th one. That's maybe a consequence of the other three. There's different ways. Huh?
Playing with children.
Sichat Yiladim, the speech of children.
Speech of children.
Yeah, Sichat, the casual speech of children, takes a man out of the world. So the reasonable conclusion is, one should not. It's just that it says, Al tarba sichai misha, don't waste time chatting with women, even your own wife. So you shouldn't waste time. Not that there's anything wrong with it, you understand? But if the man is supposed to be learning all day, and learning is really hard, it takes a whole lifetime just to get a glimpse into the Torah. So it's like a man who would be a soldier, on whose work the whole world depends. He can't waste time playing with his kids and all. Very little.
Could it mean that it's not necessarily speaking the language with your children, or rather speaking childish language?
That is a Barbanel and others. Some interpret it as Martha. But my comment was, if you're not supposed to speak childish language, then you can't really relate to the little 1 and 2 year old, because that's the only language they know.
Yeah, but I think
Some say it means teenagers, and they use filthy language and silly language and mocking language. That they call childish speech. But anyway, in Pirkei Avot, there's something called childish speech, which is considered one of the worst traps a man can fall into. And then all these three maybe lead to the fourth one, hanging around the entertainment places of ignorant people. Right? A person who's should be learning Torah shouldn't be wasting his time going to some silly movie or opera or symphony or something like that. That's trivial pursuits as the games go in the United States. And it's precious time you're wasting. Again, this doesn't apply to women. Women need to be so envious of the male role in Judaism. The male role in Judaism is very difficult, just as the female one is. Each has his own difficulties. Each has huge, infinite tasks to try to do as much as they can, and life is not a game. Life is to really accomplish. You rest in the next world. 1 hour of nachas ruach and olam haba is worth this whole world, and 1 hour of achievement in this world is more than you can do in the whole next world. So the Jewish view, I'd say pretty consistently. I always say pretty consistently, maybe you'll find a different view. Of course, the Rambam's son and so forth, that whole family, they go so far as to say have as few children as possible. Don't marry if you don't have to. Marry as late as possible. Because that's all going to pull you down if this is really what you want to do. You want to be the man who discovers a breakthrough for cancer. You can't sit around having a nice, normal, happy life. Nothing wrong with playing with your kids 5-6 hours a day. And then spending a couple hours with your wife when everyone's gone out. Just stay in the bedroom for another hour or two. Then have a nice lunch somewhere in a nice restaurant. Dress up, feel like you're somebody. Drink some wine. But you're never going to discover a cure for cancer that way. As the famous, I believe, Negro spiritual goes, you can't get to heaven on a rocking chair. Because a rocking chair won't take you there. That's summarizing that whole idea very nicely. All right, so I'm just giving you some of the outlines of the problem. And for example, some of the commentators explain the talk of chatter of children. The person should not study Torah at home. Should not. Because he'll have the chatter and botherings of his wife and children, and he won't be able to concentrate. Plus, he won't have learning partners. He should go to a yeshiva or something. Now, if he has a quiet home in the study, maybe it's okay. But in normal circumstances, it's not so okay. And our automatic response to worship children, the Norman Rockwell Saturday Evening Post cover syndrome of the whole family going to worship together is not so simple either. In the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, he brings to halacha that a person is forbidden to hug and kiss little children in synagogue, because the synagogue is devoted to the love of God, and lesser loves are not to be expressed there. Now, this doesn't sound so good to a modern person, but this is part of the tradition. Maybe you'll find those who disagree with it, I don't know, but I'm trying to present it as it is. So we have a whole bunch of statements which would indicate that you don't automatically assume the father should be a pal for the boy. One of the most potent ones, if I remember, is in the Wisdom, Reb Nachman's Wisdom, the strange, ultra-imaginative rabbi of Bretzlav, Reb Nachman. In Reb Nachman's Wisdom, it's, I think, section 49, but I'm not sure. It's under children in the book called Advice, a summary of Reb Nachman's statements. Do you happen to have it here, Reb Nachman?
No.
Okay. So in Reb Nachman's Wisdom, he says, one should not spend much time with one's children. Don't play with them much, and you have to teach them to be good Jews, and teach them the mitzvahs when the time comes and they're ready. but otherwise don't have too much to do with them. It's best for them that way. I was thinking about it, and I could tell you an idea behind this. The person who comes down to the child's level and plays with them and crawls around the floor and oh, cutesy and this and that, uses baby talk, what a cuddly little lamb. The child may enjoy it, but the child may also be frightened by it. At some level, you may give the child a terrible insecurity that way. Why? Because does the child feel secure and capable to run this world? No way.
An adult.
He needs the father to be his protection and guide in the world. If the father is also a little baby, then the kid at some level is being maybe very, very frightened because the image of the powerful father is gone. And the Bretzlover Hasidim, a most unusual bunch of people to put it mildly, but apparently they do have a lot of traditions as to what Reb Nachman meant by this stuff. And their tradition is that he meant that the awe and even a bit of fear of the father should be retained. And if the father becomes much of a playmate, then that role of awe of the father will be destroyed. Interesting. How Reb Nachman says you should never hit your children. He's a kind man, he's not a mean man. They never hit your children, and he gives all kinds of segulas for having children. He says people don't have children should practice kindness and joy and faith. These things will help you have children, and all kinds of mystical things he suggests. But he says not too much time spent with the kids. Leave them on their own. Now, he could be reflecting the Baal Shem Tov, I was thinking, who was a little boy who was orphaned and left alone, his great-grandfather. He could be reflecting perhaps some pressures put on him as the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov to be a certain conformist way, and he wanted to do his own thing. A psychological speculation on this would be interesting. But anyway, that's what he says. And you can check out the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot and all the commentaries on it, that the prattle of children takes a man out of his world that God wants him to be in. And if you really face up to it squarely, the family of a Talmud Chacham is by definition a sacrificial role, even if there happens to be money. But just in terms he's so preoccupied in his time that wife and children get less time than they get from a regular guy. Okay. Onward. Now we describe the various utensils. Rather than reading it from the text, we'll do it directly from the book, and we will stop fairly soon. Now, I think rather than the order of the Chumash, I will do the order of the book itself, just for simplicity's sake. We start with the Tabernacle. Okay? Take this one, please. We start with the Tabernacle. Now, the Tabernacle is shown here incomplete, with just its framework and
It's walls.
two curtain walls, just two of them. This is called the parochet, the dividing curtain. What it does is divides the smaller Holy of Holies from the major part of the tabernacle. This whole entity is called the tabernacle. The outside curtain is called musach. These are made of red, purple, and blue wool with linen. There are designs of cherubim on it. And we were just talking about little cherubs. That's an American, a British expression for little children. We call them cherubs. Why do we call them cherubs?
They're angelic.
They have wings.
They're still angelic.
They have wings and fire.
Innocent faces.
Innocent? I don't know. Have you ever seen an angel, Admon?
Innocent kids.
Innocent kids.
That's how we imagine them.
What do we mean by angelic? They're devilish. They're self-centered. Ki yetzer adam ra minu rav. The nature of a child is bad from his youth. The yetzer tov comes in at birth, and the yetzer ra rather. The evil inclination starts at birth. It just wants to eat and take from everyone. Doesn't want to give to anybody. And the yetzer tov, true goodness, only comes in around bar mitzvah age. As Piaget showed that the working on principles only comes about maybe 14, 15 in our retarded society.
And then what happens if you're continuing this life?
That I don't care about. But I'm telling you, little kids are not angels. Little kids are devils. We even call them a little devil. They like to play pranks and wreck things and break things. So what do you mean little kids are angelic? Why do we call them cherubs?
They look like they're angels.
They look cute. What does cute mean? Why do we enjoy the appearance of little children?
First of all, they're free.
They're helpless. They're not threatening to us. Every adult, we have to worry what they're going to do to us. Little child is helpless. It's beautiful. Of course, why do we call them beautiful? I mean, maybe that's just a reaction because of things like their helplessness. I don't know. I mean,
No,
they look nice to me too.
The main feature is that
Thank
they're
heaven for-
spontaneous.
They're
Adults
spontaneous.
are motivated. Children are spontaneous.
Are spontaneous. They're free beings.
Yes, they're free.
They're relatively free beings. That might be their appeal.
It's
Is that
the
like
freedom we dream of.
Was that like angels? Why call them cherubs? Call them, I don't know, floaters or something. Why call them cherubs? So we call them cherubs. Apparently, this may all come from some Gemara traditions which influence Western society and artists. The Gemara, for example, in Sukkot, I think it's 5b, I think it's Gemara Chagiga, say that the cherubs, Cheruv, is related to the Aramaic language, and it's Ke-ruv. What's Ke-ruv? Like a roof. Ke means like the women's bracha, Shasani Kirtzono, who has made me like his own will or personality. She's naturally good. So Ke-ruv means like a roof. What's ruv in the Aramaic language, which is cognate to Hebrew? Ruvia means a little child. So it's like a little child, the Gemara says. And somehow we then got the tradition that the faces of the Keruvim, which we're shortly going to come to in the Mishkan, are like the faces of little children. So we call them cherubim, and cherub is only one type of angel. Does anyone know where cherubim are discussed extensively in the Bible? Where? I'm sorry? We're coming to it soon, on top of the Aron. There, it just says make them and tells their position, but they're not really discussed that extensively, their nature. Where is their nature discussed extensively?
On the Aron, it's sculptures.
Yeah, but if you happen to see it, but we don't see it. But where in the Bible do you have a thorough discussion of the Keruvim?
Yechezkel?
Yeah, Yechezkel. Where in Yechezkel? The Merkavah, his vision of the divine throne and chariot, which is what chapter in Yechezkel? Do you happen to know? Anyone? First chapter is the Merkavah. However, you won't find a Keruvim there. There's no mention of a Cheruv in the first chapter. He has another vision on the river Kavar in chapter 10. And it's in chapter 10 that you have cherubimology most explicitly. All right, chapter 10 of Ezekiel. And of course, the river Kavar, where he has these visions, is the same letters as Keruv. All right. And it comes out there, there's Keruvim and Ophamim and Seraphim and Malachim. There's various categories of celestial beings. The Rambam deals with 10 levels of angels, and you saw the Torah. He considered this part of reality. So you can look in Ezekiel 10. And the Keruvim were later also in Solomon's, much bigger ones apparently in Solomon's temple. And we have it, so we have several traditions. We'll come to them in a moment. Anyway, this is the Mishkan. And the Mishkan, let's see where I am. Yeah. We see some things in it. We'll get to those. Now, this is a picture. It was about 3 times the height of a man. It's about 18 to, let's see, it's 180 to 240 inches. It's 10 cubits, 10 amot. Okay, it's about
800 inches.
about 15 to 20 feet. Okay, 15 to 20 feet. And that was the whole thing. It was made out of sort of tinker toy type of wooden pieces that interlock, holes and pegs, with 2 tendons coming out of the bottom, which were covered with the silver sockets, which were made from the half shekels collected in Kisisa, which we just read in Parshat Shkolim. Later, the half shekels were used for the annual korbanot. And this is some of the details of the construction. They had little bars holding them together on top and bottom. And then there was a big bar that went through the middle, within the boards themselves. Board caps. This shows a bunch of them put together with the middle bar. And this is what it all looked like. You had 2 big walls, which ran from east to west, as I recall. Well, it depends where the Mishkan was set up, actually. You had 2 big walls. Each of these is 1.5 cubits wide, so you have 20 of them in this wall, which is 30 cubits altogether, and then there's end pieces. And then this shows some of the work of the curtains, where keruvim in this context have either eagle faces or lion faces, not like the keruvim on the Aron. Now here's a picture with the parochas in place, and here's where a helicopter flew over the Mishkan and took a picture of it without its curtains on, but with its furniture, specially done for the camera. I believe some of the originals of these things are in the Wolfson Museum in the Heichel Shlomo building. Now, a very nice little museum. So you see the Aron Kodesh takes up the whole space of the Kodesh Kodashim, the bars even slightly protruding through the parochet, and it's described in the Medrash as having the effect of a woman's breast in her garments, and there's a number of things which have feminine symbols in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, which is where God's feminine presence, Shechina, with a feminine ending, comes down to rest. So there is a big feminine aspect about the tabernacle, which is run by males, basically, the Kohanim. So we see here outside.
The Aron.
Yes.
Well, the tablets are put in from above.
Right.
Are they never seen again?
Apparently not, as far as I
They're
know.
just never taken off.
I don't think so.
But
Now,
it's-
maybe for movie, I don't know even then. What's never taken out, by the way, are the bars. The bars of the ark must not be taken out. All the various utensils have carrying bars, but only by those of the ark is there a special prohibition here never to take them out. Which leads to a problem in the book of Numbers where it says they moved the ark and put its poles in. So some even say there were 2 sets of poles. One normal set and one set which could never be taken out. Okay.
And then also they had to take it out when David mistakenly put it on the ark, on a cart.
Yes, they took it off the cart, the whole thing. Now, here we see the menorah on one side, on the south side, and the table on the north side. We'll see them more later. Here's a little closer up picture, not of the Holy of Holies, but of the regular main section of the tabernacle, where you see the table, not loaded with its breads and all, just to give you an idea of it. It's the table without the breads, the golden altar, which we'll say goodbye to, and the menorah. Why will we say goodbye to the golden altar? All right, you will see.
So now,
I'll tell you, because
I have a question about this picture too. Why
okay,
are there 3
before
steps?
that, the golden altar we're going to forget about because for some peculiar reason, this will give you homework for next week, it's not mentioned in our portion. Our portion tells all about the tabernacle and all about its furniture, and it leaves out the golden altar, and as I recall also the laver. Okay? Now, these are steps with the utensils for trimming and lighting and so forth. The
Right,
menorah.
but they went to go up steps. The Kohanim went to go up steps. Outside, in each
The
step.
Kohanim were not to go up the steps to the altar. The
Yeah.
Kohanim could go up steps to light the menorah. So you're
Well, it's the same
asking
problem.
why.
Yeah, the same problem.
If you recall, those 2 very delicate laws given after the 10 Commandments, not to make a hewn stone altar, because the saw for the stone will give rise to thoughts or feelings of a sword, and not to go up on steps, because going on steps even with pants will probably give one the feeling of exposing oneself. It's very delicate feelings. We said that in bringing the sacrifices and taming the animal part of the person and entering the Mikdash, the Mishkan, you must go to a very great extreme of purity. Apparently, though, once you're past that stage and have made your sacrifices outside the Mishkan and come into the Mishkan, you're beyond needing such a corrective. That's how I would explain it. Onward. So this shows the entrance where there's a space, there'll be curtain here and here, where they went into the tabernacle. And this shows it with the curtain over it. Now we come to the nature of the curtains. There were 3 or 4 levels of curtains which comprised the tabernacle. The lowest level, or the innermost level rather, was the type of curtain I described before, made from the 3 colored wools and the linen woven together with the cherubim figures. There were altogether 10 of such curtains, measuring 4 cubits wide each. So the 10 would give you 40 cubits. 30 to cover the boards, 1 each to cover the end pieces on each side, and then 8 to drape around the back. They were 5 curtains and 5 curtains, each group of 5 being connected by gold clasps with blue loops. We'll see those. All right? There are 28 wide, of which 12 covered the width of the tabernacle. Yeah. And 8 hung down each side, which wasn't enough because the boards alone were 10 high. So it was sort of like a little boy with short pants. That would be a good way to remember it. We have various symbols of the woman involved in the tabernacle. It occurred to me you also have the image of a little boy with short pants. Now, on the second level are the goats. The curtains made of spun goat's hair, which are longer. They're 30 as I recall. And they're also wider. You have 11 curtains. So they're a bigger cover, which go as sort of a protective cover to the actual walls which are seen from within of the tabernacle. On top of that, you have the red-dyed ram skins and the tachash skins. It's not clear whether those are 2 more levels or 1 more level sewn together. Nobody knows whether tachash is an extinct animal or whether it's a leopard or whether it's some kind of badger or beaver or something. There's various versions of what it is. This shows the connection of 5 curtains to 5 curtains with the gold clasps and the blue loops. And there shows the whole tabernacle finished. Then there are copper clasps which hold together the 5 and 6 curtain sets of the goat's hair curtains. And there we see it with the next layer on it. Yeah. Then finally comes the rams and tachash skins. And here's some alternative Talmudic explanations depicted of how the whole thing really looked. I'll be darned if I know. Now there's a map of the courtyard itself. There's the Mishkan, which is 10 by 20, I'm sorry, 10 by 30 by 10 high.
Yeah. It's 3 cubes.
Yeah, all right.
And
Then,
the Holy of Holies is a perfect cube.
I'm sorry?
The Holy of Holies is a perfect cube.
Is a perfect cube. It's how much by how much?
10 by 10 by 10.
10 by 10 by 10. Okay? And then outside of the tabernacle, outside completely, is the ramp and the altar, the bronze altar on which animal sacrifices were brought. What was brought on the gold altar inside that I showed you before?
The spices.
Incense, that's all. No animal offerings. The outside copper, bronze, or brass altar is where the animal offerings were brought. And then there's a big courtyard all around it, which is 100 amas long by 50 wide. I don't remember. Yeah, 50 wide. Okay. It has a special entrance. There's a little picture here of the entire structure, which we'll have a better picture of soon. So this is the outer courtyard, which, except for its entrance curtain, is simple white linen on filleted wooden poles with silver, hung by hooks, and the bases here are not silver, but copper, as I recall. Okay. Here it shows a little detail of how it was made. Baron, this is a wonderful book and a useful book and an out-of-print book and all that, but it's not such a scholarly book compared to others. And there's many more versions of these things, and what's not a fraction as beautiful or nice to use, but far more informative, are all the little black and white diagrams in R.E.A. Kaplan's The Living Torah, which I recommend heartily. He knows a lot more. This shows the actual entrance passageway. And here's the details of the poles which held up the curtains and their sockets and hooks. And here we see the whole thing put together. This is a very outstanding picture. You have the courtyard and the animal altar inside the courtyard.
The altar should be uppercut.
Yes, it is. It is basically. Yeah, this picture isn't so hard. There's better ones coming. Then in between the altar and the tabernacle, you have the laver where they wash their hands and feet before doing either sacrificial service outside or other services inside, okay? And now we come to the vessels themselves. Here is the ark, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what is the ark made of?
It's a wooden box with gold inside and gold out.
Right. It's basically a wooden box. The ark is a crate, a wooden box. Then there is an envelope, I would call it, of thin sheets of gold placed in it with a rim to cover its rim. And there's an envelope outside of it with a zer, or a crown, a filigree work, on top of it. All right. So it's 3 in 1. I think I got the wrong religion. That doesn't sound so good. But it comes out to be all one when we're done.
Now the wood is completely concealed. You can't
Yes,
see
that's what I
the
said.
wood.
It
Yeah.
comes out to be one. All you see is gold. Now, is there something that's difficult to understand about that if you were making it? There's a wooden box, gold outside, gold inside. You don't see the wood at all. Is there something that seems wasteful there? Or
They
meaningless?
just make it out of wood.
Well, all right, maybe wood is better, maybe it's less heavy, all kinds of
No,
reasons.
wood is so
But
strong.
why put gold inside the box? The box has a cover afterwards. Why put gold inside? Why not just leave wood inside? Perhaps there was a fear the wood would rot, I don't know. But there's another way to look at these things, which the Gemara Yoma does. There's a lot of discussion of things here around Yoma 52, 54. What is inside the ark? No, the ark is in the Holy of Holies. And what's in the ark?
The 2 tablets.
2 tablets.
And the broken.
And the broken one, 4 tablets. Moshe had more than one headache. Each one takes 2 tablets. All right. 4 tablets. What else? Some say maybe the whole Torah layer. Some say the Torah is put by the side of the ark. There's a little jar of mun. Different things in the Holy of Holies. A few extras. So does it have the whole Torah in it? Even if you put the whole Chumash in it, does it have the whole Torah?
No.
No.
It's the oral Torah.
The oral Torah. The majority, and perhaps more important part of the Torah, is that which is not written down. Our oral tradition from Moshe, from God, from Sinai. So where is the ark for the oral Torah? Where's that kept?
Yes.
Us. So everybody who learns Torah with such devotion as I described before, even maybe having to have sacrifice of his own family and the basic pleasures of life. So such a person becomes the ark for the oral Torah. And the laws of the ark for the written law become also the laws for the ark of the oral law. Now we can understand the pure gold lining inside. It says a Talmud Chacham must have his insides just like his outsides. It's not enough to be pure gold outside to make a beautiful appearance and speak melodiously, but he must have a pure inside of gold too, okay? Just like the broken tablets were also put in the ark, so a senile Talmud Chacham is to be treated with the same respect as if he were well, and so forth. So many laws are learned out by analogy between the ark for the written law and the ark for the oral law. By the way, that Mishnah I mentioned before in Avot about staying away from children's talk and wine and sleep, some explain it because it follows the Mishnah which says that anyone who people enjoy, God enjoys. And anyone who people don't like, God doesn't like. So they say that Reb Dos is now bringing a corrective. So therefore you think I'll just go around grooving and having nice relationships all day, playing with little children and having a nice lunch with wine, and we'll all sing, and we'll put our arms around each other and sing Hine Ma Tov Ma'anayim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. And I'll spend my whole day sort of just like grooving in this wonderful human feeling. So Reb Dosa says, no, that's not for a man. A man's supposed to learn. When it says that the spirit of the creatures enjoys them, it doesn't mean that they sit around, eat together, and drink together, and they play with little children. It means they enjoy his spirit. Their spirit relates to his. They sense he knows the Torah. And again, he can be the nicest, sweet man in the world. This may contradict all the stories of Baal Shem Tov, who was a teacher of little children. But to be a Talmud Chacham, he has to give up those life pleasures because he's going to do something even higher and more important. Not that there's anything wrong with those things. And again, if a person's not learning, why not? He certainly should do nice things like that. Okay, so that is the ark. Has to have these bars, which can never go out, on the rings. This shows the kaporet. The kaporet is one of the 2 things which has to be carved out of a piece of solid gold like the menorah. Everything else is wood, plated with gold. Things can be joined together. But with the exception of the actual oil holders of the menorah, it has to be one piece. And this has to be one piece. This picture shows the version of the cherubim as having human faces, children's faces, and the Talmud adds the faces of a boy and a girl. Both sexes are represented again. One's at one end of the kapparet, one at the other. They're to face each other, and they're also to face the ark. So apparently they look somewhat down and across. Different versions of how that combination is achieved. Now, they're facing each other shows apparently the huge stress on family, on man and woman and their togetherness as a basic essence of our Torah. And indeed, in Solomon's temple, there were all sorts of mysterious miracles with these cherubim, that they would actually embrace each other erotically. According to the Gemara in Yoma 54, they would be in erotic embrace, and they would open up the parochas and all, so that all the Jews could see this when they came for the holidays. And then when the enemy destroyed our temple and they saw this erotic sculpture, they assumed that the Jews were just like them, because they couldn't imagine the blending of heaven and earth. That the love of God in Israel could be symbolized or portrayed by a song of songs or an erotic statue. So that's what the Talmud says this was all about. Very interesting. And there had to be two of them so that no one should think it's a substitute for God, who's only one. Right? And when the Jews and God were not in good shape, when Shir Hashirim, she couldn't find her lover, then they would turn away from each other and there would be no erotic embrace. Talmud Yoma 54. Now here's a nice color picture of the whole thing put together. The Torah twice mentions placing the tablets in the ark, both before and after the covering with the kapparet. This may indicate that they had to be in before the kapparet was put on. Here is a picture of the table, which is also on the cover. The table for the showbreads, which is in the north, it also has a crown. It symbolizes the kingdom of wealth, the kingdom of kingship, as opposed to the kingdom of Torah, the crown that was about the ark. Remember, the ark had a crown, a filigree work on it. Let's see where that one is. Here, this sort of border on top is called the crown, the Zer. That's the crown of Torah. This is the crown of kingship on the table. Now, for my bit of research, I am reasonably convinced this picture is wrong. It's wrong because it shows the gold trays on which the 12 breads rested in 2 rows of 6 as being on the table. My impression is trays never hit that table. Such trays made out of iron were used to bake the breads in the oven, and then the gold trays were used to carry the breads from the oven to the table where they were placed right on this pipe arrangement. The trays themselves, to the best of my knowledge, never hit the table. So I think this picture is wrong.
Now, what was the table for?
The 12 breads, the showbreads. I'll get to it.
Put on the table?
Yes, I'll get to it. This is the basic structure of the table itself, before its superstructure and before the crowns. The crown. With rings again for carrying poles. Now it shows it here with its crown, with its Zer. And here it shows this superstructure, I don't know quite what to call it. The Hebrew, and there's many versions what each term in Hebrew means, but let's just go by this book. Umenaki Otav is this framework of 6 vertical poles, and the table is slipped into it. It surrounds the table, you see? The table is sort of slipped into it. It's outside of the crown, this part anyway. Then there are crossbars which connect these high vertical bars. There are horizontal crossbars, which are called Kishotav. Kishotav are these hollow, smaller pipes which connect, and they're hollow so air can come through, because the bread has to last a week without spoiling. One of the miracles is it never got stale. And the Kohanim, it's changed each Friday to 12 breads, representing the prosperity of the 12 tribes. And the Kohanim get to eat the leftover bread. That is really soul food. Now, these are the pans and the ladles for incense. Right. Incense was burnt, 1 for each row of 6 breads. And here we see the whole thing together in gold, Again, a mistake because it shows the trays on it. The breads rested on the tube-like racks themselves. The breads just rested on these pipes.
Or without the trays.
Without the trays. Now comes the menorah. And this shows one version of the menorah. If you look at R.A. Kaplan's Living Torah, there's quite a few versions of the base. And also, Maimonides and Rashi both say the arms were straight, not curved, and that these cups here, the 3 cups on top of each one, were not in their normal positions on this menorah, but upside down, with the narrower part, the base of the cup, on top. But this shows the menorah. There's knobs, cups with an almond design. There's flowers, which is a disc with a flower design. And then there's the actual lights where they put the oil and wick on top. Here's a little more detail of the base and the structure of a cup and a kaftor, a ball, and a flower disc. Okay? Kaftor v'ferach is the name of an embroidery store.
Hexagonal base now.
This is one of many versions.
It had 3 feet.
That's another version, but there were 3 feet. This book does not show alternative versions. R.A. Kaplan's does. Now, the wick, or the holder, it's not clear just how it was done, but somehow it was set up so that each flame from the side branches focused back on the center branch. And the center branch represents, according to the Abarbanel, the Torah, and the 6 side branches, all branches of secular wisdom, things like philosophy and mathematics and aesthetics, which flow out of the Torah, which only makes sense if there's one God who created the world, that there should be order and laws in the world, and everything should be connected. And then they shed their light back on the Torah. One's derech eretz in turn enlightens the Torah. This shows the gold altar, which I shall not go into much because that's next week's topic. Here is the brass altar, the brass, bronze, or copper, different translations of Nechosha, which is outside the tabernacle. It has this sort of reservoir around it, which can catch blood and all that comes off it. There's a base, there's poles, there's corners of the altar. It's about 10 by 10, as I remember. It's like a little room on top where the Kohen walks around and burns offerings. They're slaughtered down there, blood sprinkled, then he brings the things up to burn them on the altar. And it shows the ramp going up to it. It's filled with dirt. Remember, no steps. It hooks in until they dismantle it. And then we have the laver, which he washes from. That's it. So we've gone through pretty much everything that's in this week's Parsha. Let's just see if there's anything at the very end. No. This is not the order in which they're in the Parsha. You have all the utensils first and then the Mishkan, because they're the main thing. The Aron Kodesh being first, that's the main thing. All right. Now, we have finished the Parsha. The Haftarah deals with Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple is much grander and bigger, but there's some differences. It's done with non-Jewish workmen and compulsory levies. It's no longer all volunteer. And somehow, even though it's so much grander and magnificent and more impressive and inspiring, the great synagogue doesn't do as well as the little shtibel. And the Mishkan is never destroyed in the fashion that the temple is destroyed. And some say because it was built by pure men whose hearts volunteered them and only Jews and the materials they had with them, without this huge government project. Anyway, that's the Haftarah, huh? Quite an achievement
anyway.
Yes, they did wonderful things, but somehow it wasn't as much as the little Mishkan.
There were a few tons of logs.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is we have to have upright. It says, Atzei Shitim Omdim, upright boards for the boards of the tabernacle. And what does that mean, upright boards? Rashi says they have to be in the direction of their growth. But Professor Felix has a very interesting peshat in Nature Man and the Bible. He says the problem, what is Shittim? What kind of tree? What kind of wood was used for tabernacle? Acacia. What's an acacia?
Is it
It's a little tree with yellow flowers.
A little tree with yellow flowers. Where does it grow? In the desert? No, in the Negev. How big is it?
We had this argument today. The rabbi thought it isn't a desert tree.
Well,
because Yaakov took the seeds with it to Mitzrayim.
Yes, but how big is an acacia tree?
Medium-sized tree.
What would you say? How tall?
All desert trees are small.
15 feet is the most.
Yeah, desert trees are never big.
All right. Is it straight or wiggles around? Now, 10 cubits is about 15 to 18 feet of straight wood. Can you get it out of one of those trees?
Not only that, it had to be 1.5 amot wide.
Yeah, could you get it? Right, they're not wide enough.
Right.
They're not 1.5 amot wide either. Thank you. So therefore, Professor Felix's conclusion is that Atzei Shitim Ondim, standing acacia trees, refers to a special kind of acacia which was wide enough and high enough and dry enough and moist enough, just the right wood for making such a prefab structure. And indeed, he found the Talmud speaks of the people who treated a certain grove of trees up in the Jordan Valley, as I recall, as sacred. And they asked the rabbi, may we use them? Our fathers never did. He says, no, if you have such a custom, you shouldn't use them. This was Yaakov's grove, from which we're taking the holy trees for the holy Mishkan. And then he found that the Arabs today have a similar legend about a certain grove in that area. So he went to the grove and he found it's a different kind of acacia, which is taller and broader, not like the desert acacia, and would have been the perfect material for this purpose. So that's his conclusion, what the Torah means by Atzei Shitim Omdim. It's a species identification, upright standing acacias. Okay? And a man should be like the tree of the field, that we should all be upright and standing up from the Mishkan to greet God. That's enough for this Mishkan.
Sit down.
B'vakasha. Monday.